In this episode, we take the big, messy feeling that can come from staring at a certification blueprint and turn it into something you can actually hold in your mind while walking, driving, or doing chores. A spoken study roadmap is not a printed plan with boxes and check marks, and it is not a rigid schedule that makes you feel guilty when life happens. It is a mental route that tells you where you are, what you already understand, and what the next learning step should be, using the AI domains and tasks as signposts. For brand new learners, the hardest part is often not the difficulty of the content, but the uncertainty of how it all fits together. A roadmap solves that by giving you a story that connects the topics, so you can review the story out loud and notice where your understanding feels thin. Once you can say the roadmap clearly in your own words, you are no longer studying blind, because you can steer your attention toward the tasks that actually need practice. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea to understand is that domains and tasks are not just categories on a website, but a set of promises about what the exam expects you to be able to do. A domain is a big area of competence, and a task is a specific kind of judgment or activity that sits inside that area. When you build a spoken roadmap, you are essentially turning those promises into a sequence of questions you can ask yourself. That sequence should match the flow of an audit, because the AIA is built around an audit mindset, not random facts. So your roadmap begins with understanding the AI system and its impacts, then moves into governance and controls, and then moves into ongoing oversight and improvement. Even if you do not yet know the exact wording of every task, you can still track them by the kind of thinking they represent, such as evaluating requirements, assessing risk, verifying controls, and checking monitoring. The key is to speak the roadmap as a journey, because journeys are easier for the brain to recall than scattered notes. To build the roadmap, start by creating 3 simple sentences that capture the role of each domain in the overall audit workflow. The first sentence should describe how you make sense of an AI solution and its context, including what it is supposed to do and what impacts it may create for people, systems, and decisions. The second sentence should describe how you evaluate whether the organization has defined expectations and put governance and controls in place to manage risk responsibly. The third sentence should describe how you verify that the system is monitored, issues are handled, and improvements are made over time, because AI does not stay still in real environments. These sentences do not need fancy language, and in fact, plain language is better because the goal is recall under pressure. When you can repeat those 3 sentences smoothly, you have created the backbone of your roadmap. Every task will attach to one of those sentences, and that attachment makes studying more efficient. Now you strengthen the roadmap by adding task-level checkpoints that you can speak as questions. For beginners, questions are more powerful than statements because questions force your brain to retrieve and organize knowledge instead of just recognizing words. A domain 1 checkpoint question might be, can I explain what kind of model this is and what it influences in the real world, without slipping into hype or confusion? A domain 2 checkpoint question might be, can I explain what requirements and controls should exist and what evidence would prove they are real, not just claimed? A domain 3 checkpoint question might be, can I explain what monitoring should look like, what signals matter, and what should happen when the system behaves unexpectedly? Each time you study a topic, you connect it back to one of these checkpoint questions, and you say out loud how it answers the question. Over time, you build a network of spoken answers that map directly to tasks, which means you are studying in a way that naturally fits the exam style. A roadmap also needs a way to measure progress without a spreadsheet, and the easiest method is to classify your understanding into 3 levels using only your voice. The first level is recognition, where you have heard the term and can give a rough definition but cannot apply it confidently. The second level is explanation, where you can describe the concept in plain language and give a simple example that makes sense. The third level is audit use, where you can explain how the concept changes what you would ask for, what evidence you would want, and what risk it helps you evaluate. When you speak your roadmap, you can notice which topics are stuck at recognition, and those are the ones that need more teaching time. This approach is beginner-friendly because it replaces vague anxiety with a clear signal. I can recognize this, but I cannot yet use it as an auditor. That signal tells you exactly what to do next, which is revisit the concept until you can connect it to evidence and risk. Because the roadmap must track every domain and task, it helps to think about tasks as verbs, even when you do not have the official list in front of you. Many AI tasks can be mentally grouped by what they ask you to do, such as evaluate, identify, assess, verify, and monitor. In a spoken roadmap, you can attach each verb to a stage of the audit journey. Evaluate tends to show up early when you are examining an AI solution, its purpose, and its potential impact. Identify and assess show up when you look for risks, assumptions, dependencies, and gaps between claims and evidence. Verify shows up when you examine controls, documentation, approvals, and operational practices to confirm they match requirements. Monitor shows up later when you consider drift, incidents, performance degradation, and ongoing oversight. Speaking the verbs helps because it makes the tasks feel active instead of static, and it reminds you that the exam is testing what you would do, not just what you know. For a beginner, that shift from nouns to verbs is one of the fastest ways to become comfortable with audit questions. A strong spoken roadmap also includes a repeatable way to handle scenario questions, because scenarios are where many learners lose confidence. The method is to translate the scenario into 3 quick statements: what the system is, what the organization claims or intends, and what could go wrong. That translation alone often reveals which domain the question is targeting. If the question is about what the model is doing, what data it relies on, or what kinds of impacts it might have, you are in Domain 1 territory. If the question is about whether the organization defined requirements, assigned ownership, approved changes, or designed controls, you are in Domain 2 territory. If the question is about ongoing performance, drift, monitoring, escalation, or corrective action, you are in Domain 3 territory. Your spoken roadmap becomes a decision tool because you can say the 3 statements and then ask which stage of the journey needs attention first. That reduces the feeling of randomness and makes your answers more consistent. Another important part of the roadmap is building linkages between concepts that are often studied separately, because the exam will expect you to connect them. For example, requirements and monitoring are linked, because you cannot monitor meaningfully without knowing what acceptable behavior is. Data quality and fairness are linked, because biased or incomplete data can lead to unfair outcomes even if the model looks accurate overall. Human review and accountability are linked, because automated decisions need a clear process for escalation when outcomes affect people or high-stakes operations. Dependencies and risk are linked, because an AI system can fail due to upstream changes that nobody is watching. In your roadmap, you should practice saying these linkages in 1 or 2 sentences, because linkages are what turn isolated facts into audit judgment. When you can speak how one concept influences another, you are demonstrating the kind of integrated thinking that certification exams usually reward. Beginners often avoid linkages because they feel complicated, but spoken practice makes them simpler and more intuitive over time. A roadmap should also include common misconceptions you will deliberately avoid, because exam distractors often exploit beginner assumptions. One misconception is that technical sophistication always equals lower risk, when in reality complexity can increase risk by reducing transparency and making controls harder to verify. Another misconception is that fairness and safety are separate from business goals, when they often must be built into requirements and measured just like performance. Another misconception is that vendor-provided AI systems are automatically trustworthy, when an audit mindset still asks for evidence, documentation, and oversight even when the model is not built in-house. A final misconception is that monitoring is something you do once at deployment, when monitoring is an ongoing activity that must adapt as the environment changes. If you can speak these misconceptions and the corrected view, you become harder to trick by answer choices that sound confident but ignore audit fundamentals. That is a quiet way the roadmap protects you during the exam. Because this is an audio-first approach, you also want a simple daily routine that uses the roadmap without turning into a rigid schedule. The routine is to speak the 3-domain backbone once, then choose one checkpoint question and answer it out loud using a fresh example you invent on the spot. The example can be simple, like an AI system that recommends products, flags fraud, or routes support tickets, because the content is not the point, the reasoning is. When you answer, you try to include what evidence you would want and what risk you are most concerned about, because those are audit-centered habits. If you stumble, that stumble is valuable feedback because it shows you where to study next. This routine works well for beginners because it focuses on retrieval, and retrieval is what the exam demands. It also builds comfort speaking the ideas, which makes your thinking clearer even if you never speak during the actual test. As your roadmap improves, you can make it more precise by adding a consistent set of evidence prompts that you attach to any task. Evidence prompts are simple phrases you can say to yourself, like what document proves this, what record shows it happened, what metric shows it is working, and what process defines who decides. These prompts keep you from answering in vague generalities, which is a common beginner pattern. They also help you choose between close answer options, because the best option often points toward verifiable artifacts and repeatable processes. When you practice with evidence prompts, you learn to treat governance as something that must be demonstrated, not something that can be assumed. Over time, your answers start to sound like audit reasoning even if you are new to the field. That is exactly what a certification exam is trying to measure, because it is easier to teach vocabulary than to teach disciplined judgment. It is also worth building a small mental habit for handling anxiety, because anxiety can make the roadmap feel like it disappears when you need it. A simple trick is to slow your breathing and repeat the three-domain backbone in your head, not to memorize words, but to re-enter the audit journey mentally. Once you re-enter the journey, you can place the question into a stage, and that placement restores structure. Structure reduces panic because it turns the problem into a familiar pattern. Beginners often think confidence comes from knowing everything, but in reality, confidence often comes from having a method that works even when knowledge is incomplete. Your spoken roadmap is that method, and you can practice it until it feels automatic. When it is automatic, the exam becomes a series of familiar decisions rather than a fog of unfamiliar terms. By the time you finish building and practicing this spoken study roadmap, you will have created something more valuable than a memorized set of definitions, because you will have a way to think. You will be able to hear an AI scenario and quickly decide whether you need to focus on understanding the system and its impacts, verifying governance and controls, or evaluating monitoring and ongoing oversight. You will also have a built-in progress check, because you can tell whether you can use a concept as an auditor or only recognize it. That self-awareness helps you study efficiently, which matters when you are new and everything feels like a lot. In the next episodes, we will add targeted vocabulary and clearer explanations of AI concepts. But you will always return to this roadmap as the thing that holds it all together. When you can speak the roadmap smoothly and apply it to new examples, you have turned the AI domains and tasks into a practical mental tool rather than a stressful list.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.